This Archmage pseudo triple cock Hierophant is one of the pound for pound strongest HC viable builds this patch. It mirrors the build power of Ice Nova Hierophant, but also goes for a higher QOL setup, has better clear, smoother coverage, even more AoE, and is able to retain that one button playstyle. This build is actually enabled by the new Axe enchant, which allows you to trigger a spell once every 0.25 seconds, although it does need to be a fire spell. So in my case, I use Volatile Dead of Confinement and DD of Chain. I also use a separate cast on crit setup in my chest with Lancing Steel, allowing me to summon corpses through Desecrate. So effectively, I'm triggering 3 spells simultaneously, and my 2 damaging spells are on pseudo 7 links because of my Axecraft and the Squire. Now since my chest cock setup is almost entirely utility based, I'm able to use the Mana Leech support, which is a huge boon for this build, especially this patch, where a lot of Archmage builds are actually struggling with mana recovery. Mana Leech support does have enough damage, especially when it's paired with the Instant Leech Mastery, solving one of the crucial issues for Archmage Hierophant. This is even more significant for my build because I'm triggering so many spells at the same time, and then Lancing Steel's lingering hit behavior allows you to have much more sustained uptime on bosses, better QOL, and also better sustained recovery. In many ways, I see this as the QOL successor to Archmage Ice Nova or Archmage Ball Lightning as those Hierophant League starters, and it has a really solid defensive shell, getting about 140,000 max Ellie hit, about 40k max Fizz hit. It's got suppression cap, elemental element immunity, stun immunity, high evasion, permanent consecrated ground, which means more regen, curse mitigation, and also triple sourced instant leech. Before getting into the further details on the build, I really want to highlight one specific piece of technology that I've ironically stolen from Dan, but not from his build this league, but rather something he played back in Sanctum League. So this particular Militant Faith is actually really special and actually converts Sentinel, a node on the tree that most Archmage Hierophants usually don't want to touch, into Cloistered, which allows you to have elemental ailment immunity while on consecrated ground. Now as far as the devotion threshold goes, I'm able to easily reach this because the Natural Instinct plays slightly above that in the Silent Start area, and as far as getting consecrated ground generation, rather than using say Inquisitor Jewels or I don't know, Bottled Faith, something inconsistent, I opt for Rational Doctrine, and I'm able to reach the threshold for Rational Doctrine by then tattooing a bunch of my intelligence nodes into something else, lightning damage, lightning res, crit damage reduction, poison chance, whatever you want, and then balancing my strength and intelligence. And this allows you to not only have consecrated ground, but also profane ground. So basically, this really clever combination of 3 jewels gives my build ailment immunity, permanent consecrated ground, permanent profane ground, which means 10% increased curse effect, 100% increased critical strike chance, and this is not to mention the explicit bonuses from Militant Faith itself with 200 Devotion, which include Ellie Res, which you need a ton of, especially when you want to be really offensive with suffixes, and also reduce mana cost, which is even better the more you have of it. Anyways, let's get into Axecraft and the build details. One of the things that I've been asked about most is how to actually craft the axe for this build. And basically you want to probably just buy items, but let's say we're starting from scratch. So I have a Shaper Axe and I have an Elder Axe. So let's do the Elder Axe first. It's going to begin with a Reforged crit until I hit the nodes that I actually want. And here I'm looking for ICD and crit multi. Ideally you'd want to have that as the sole Elder based mod. And then on this side you want to do the same thing, another Reforged crit, and you're looking for ICS this time. So increased critical strikes. We'll try to hit that with I think attack crit. So that's right here. There are no other Shaper mods on this, so now we're ready to go. And then from here on, I mean, ideally you actually go for level 21, but I'm kind of lazy here, so you use an Awakener Orb. And we want to export here, so generate export data, bam. So we want to awaken the 2 items, and bam, we have this. So at this stage, it's actually really, really not cool, because I'm trying to null the fire res, and that might not go so well. And it's going really, really, really poorly. But eventually when you're able to do that, or if not, you restart the craft, or if not, you sell a base, or if not, you could actually dense fossil spam on your double awakened base. But if you're lucky, then you'll null that off. I think it's like a 1 in 3, roughly. You know, you have to deal with the prefixes as well. But then you have this base. And then from here, I usually go prefixes can't be, or suffixes can't be changed rather, which is over here. Craft that, and then I actually lock this, and then I use a Reforged speed. You can't use an augment, so I use a Reforged speed here, and you're praying that you don't hit max prefixes, and that you do hit ICS local on the suffix, or rather IAS on the suffix. You could also Reforged crit again, but I would rather not do that. And there you go. So it's double crit, increased attack speeds. From here, you would use the Wild Bristle Matron. It's actually not here, but that will actually force on suffix can't be changed again. So we'll be using suffix can't be changed a lot. So this is suffix can't be changed, and because I have these mods, I'll scour. And then I want to recraft suffix can't be changed again, and then I'd want to Veil Orb, and then I'd want to block increased physical damage on this. And basically what you're looking for on the Veiled Orb is either lightning damage or spell damage. Either is fine, I prefer lightning damage. But here I get spell damage, mana regen, bam! And then the end of the craft is simply hits can't be evaded. And that's pretty much the whole craft. Oopsies. This one. And that's a completed axe. So those are all the steps. You can pick your axe of choice. You want to use a 1.3 AS base. Because the crit chance is always locked to 5. That kind of is what it is. So that's the whole thing. There's a bunch of failure points actually on it, but you can see it goes, kind of reasonably smoothly, other than that first and all, which really sucks. The reforged speed can also kind of go wrong, but that's kind of what it is. And you can end with a slam. I did hit the +1 socketed gems on my particular axe with the slam, but it's really unimportant because 1, I'm Archmage, 2, I'm corpse space, so extra gem levels isn't really important. But we'll slam this just for shits, and we got 1 to 2, insane. Anyways, that's the axe craft. Hope that's there. Second thing, let's go over the build now. This is a really cool build I really want to cover in a lot of different ways. So I'll start out with the tree, because it's fairly simple. It looks pretty standard. A lot of Archmage trees go through here, but because I'm not Elemental Overload, I'm actually going to go through the top side. One thing to note is that it's a pretty jewel-starved tree. However, there are 2 different 3-point jewels to opt for here, and they're both really good since I am fairly attribute-starved, especially when I'm playing for Rational Doctrine. Otherwise, fairly standard for Archmage tree. I am playing the Inevitable Judgment jewels. These are really expensive now. I don't even think they're the best. I would personally right now be opting for Righteous Providence, but I'm broke and can't really switch my jewels out. I don't really want to sell things. Augury is also okay. There's a few other options that can be kind of pseudo acceptable. But yeah, that's sort of what we're looking for. Probably between these 2 Forbidden Jewels. But you don't actually need either of them. It's definitely a playable build without it. And basically the way I'd see it is Inevitable Judgment is just a richer man's version of Inversion Mastery. So if you can't afford the jewels, you can just take this. And that will pretty much do really, really similar things. That's what like Dan uses on his League Start. Fairly standard tree otherwise. I do run a single cluster, and I prefer to play Leech on here so that it opens up the Implicit on my gloves, and I really like that. I'm running double clusters for crit. Really easy to craft, and then they just enable a bunch of jewel sockets. Later on, I'll probably look to be going right side playing double cluster, but it is what it is. I have already mentioned this Timeless Jewel set. I forgot that it also gives you Inner Conviction. So this Militant Faith is actually crazy efficient. I do like this setup. I do like going for Militant Faith, Rational Doctrine, Attribute Balancing, and then just having all those things solved. Even in my Mage Blood setup for the later part of the game, which I won't be talking about yet because I want to iterate on, but it's pretty much a complete Mage Blood build at this point. I think it's actually pretty well built. I still go for this core setup. There you can put it on other nodes. It doesn't need to be on Sentinel. It could be like here. It could be, up here at Exceptional Performance, which is actually really nice because then you can just have a little bit of skill effect duration leading in, which is helpful for the build because there are a lot of duration skills. Anyways, that's the tree. Second thing, skill gems. These are actually really cool. So in my main links, I run DD Chain, VD, and ManaCoC. The reason I do this is because there's actually not a lot of strong support gems. So Power Charge on crit for my build, I think is like 28% more damage. So that's pretty solid. And in the square, I run Awaken LD Focus. I do sacrifice Shock because I don't think it's probably that consistent, but it might be better to not use. Archmage and then Inspiration. I think the next best support is probably like Cruelty. Lightning Pen isn't good because I'm playing Inevitable Judgment. But if I wasn't playing Inevitable Judgment and I was playing Virgin Mastery, Lightning Pen is actually really good as a support. So there's that. In my boots, I run Arcane Cloak and Automation. I make sure this isn't linked to Frostblink, and then I manually cast Assassin's Mark. It's the only manual casted thing I do on this as far as damage output goes. My chest runs a Lancing Steel setup. So one thing I'm not sure about still is whether or not I want to run Spell Cascade. I have bad feelings about Spell Cascade with Desecrate, especially when I don't have Undertaker. Because I do think it interacts kind of weirdly with DD Chains, that sort of sequential detonate dead thing. I wonder if it gets just ended sometimes when there aren't corpses. So I prefer to play with this setup for now, and the damage is pretty consistent. Obviously I want to level my gems up more, and I'm kind of just starting this out. But I do run ICS, Faster Attacks, Mana Leech, and Awakened Cock. So Faster Attacks isn't actually mandatory in this. It just makes the skill feel a lot better. And there's a lot of other things that this could swap into that are all great for utility, including things like Life Gain on a hit, possibly Spell Cascade, Culling Strike. Even your Assassin Smart can actually live here, or one of your other curses instead, so you can actually automate that as well. And because you're playing Lancing Steel, you're not actually worried about the trigger rate. In the helmet, I go for something pretty classic. I go for a focused trigger setup. So you can see that crafted mod here, which means that even though I have 4 spells and relatively low cast speed on this build, I can just press focus and it'll instantly proc both curses and both area skills, which is really great. Again, to note your conditional defenses, it's an Archmage build, so everything is conditional, but you know, it's kind of there and it's really important that you play with it. Finally, shield charge faster attacks, Eternal Blessing, Grace. If you don't care about defense, skip Grace, but you're kind of trolling if you do that. Gear-wise, and this is where it gets fun. I've mentioned how to do the Axecraft, and again, this fire spell on hit is a global cooldown. It's per spell. Sorry, it's not a global cooldown. That's what I meant. It's actually per spell. So basically having 2 different spells being triggered at the same time is totally fine. It's just at the loss of 1 support, but it's super worth it, especially when I'm using VD of Confinement, which has really high damage effectiveness at 210. It's way stronger than like, you know, VDC, and then DD Chain is insane. And both skills are actually just really great in this particular setup from this axe, and for Archmage in general, because DD Chain hits 8 times, up to, and VDC thing hits 3 times, except that gets doubled because they both have a spell portion and a corpse portion, and both of those things are affected by Archmage, which is why I have my config set up the way that it is, accounting for attack speed, cast speed, that sort of thing. Squire in my secondary is what it is. My helmet, looking for life. I bought this one straight off of trade. Dexterity is sort of the main stat that's going to be lacking the most. And then I do play a little bit of Elemental Shift on my helmet. I also look for Elemental Shift on my chest, that 10% fizz taken as cold, and then max res. This was a random dense fossil chest. I've since recrafted a different chest, which I'm not using yet, using Fractured Suppression, then dense fossils, but this was pretty lucky. And then I actually don't need that elemental ailment immunity, but I am using that avoid stun because it gets me to 98% stun avoid, which is, you know, really good. Gloves, I like Alva Gloves. I think that damage with hits against chilled enemies is really great, even though I'm not using Dan's other tech, which is to grab this plus the mastery here, these that min 10%, and then having a little bit of cold damage. Frost Shield does actually apply chill, so that's fairly good. And then, you know, it's T1 cold res. I'm using suppression. Unnerve is lower value for this build because 1, I'm using punishment, and then 2, Unnerve doesn't affect the corpse portion damage of Archmage. But I think gloves like this later on, and then paired with damage while leeching, will be really strong. Really fun craft to do later, but early on, this is that. And then for boots, I'm running CDR because there's just no downside, and then it avoids stun implicit, looking for res, suppression, mana, life, that sort of thing. Foible as an amulet of choice. So this is actually really great because it makes your attributes really easy to hit, especially when you're using like necrotic armor. Later on, again, this wants to become, I think, a focused amulet, but that's a really expensive craft. Foible will be what you're playing at until you're roughly approaching the 2 to 3 mirror budget. And then I'm using one of my really big rings to cap res, but I'm overcapped on res, which is quite nice. Just Reforged Chaos on a fractured base. Bench-crafted mana would actually be better at this point. Anathema is really strong. It enables my, I think, Tricurse setup. Yeah, Punishment and Feeble Assmark instead of having to grab Whispers of Doom. So it's basically a +2 curse ring. That also gives you just like a little bit of int and ES, and then a belt with CDR, Chaos Res, Mana Strength. So attributes are sort of the name of the game. A lot of my res is generally fixed because this Militant Faith is so cool, and you could also help Alira if I really want it. And I also have a 2-point for Faith and Steel, Holy Dominion. There's just a lot of all res on this build that makes it really easy to gear, actually. My flasks, I only know one of them, which is that I like to play with a flask charge on crit generation, diamond flask only. This is a global cooldown, and if it's on multiple flasks, it'll actually split your flask generation. I find that the diamond flask is the only one that's really important because that's my damage uptime on bosses. Everything else is more like utility or like mapping focused, so that is what it is. But I do like to play with 1 life flask for CB. Watcher's Eye, Great Suppression. It's actually a 2 mod. But obviously I don't run Clarity right now because I'm too socket starved and I haven't really thought about how I want to fit Arrogance Clarity into my build. But if I could, this would be a really great Watcher's Eye. But it's 1 prop for now. A Natty is going to be fitting down here, which I've already mentioned, paired with the Militant down here and 1 point Inner Conviction. Large Cluster, Leech, Inspired Oppression. Backnote is Prismatic Heart. I'm not taking it. And then 2 different crit clusters for pressure points and quick cutaway. Good for QOL, good for your crit chance, decent for your damage, and then really nice to get a little bit of extra movement speed. Rational Doctrine is, again, part of that 3 jewel interaction I outlined earlier, and then I'm running the Forbidden set for Inevitable Judgment, though I don't think that's optimal. Finally, running just a rare jewel up here. There's a lot of options actually here. This could be like a Thread of Hope medium, and a medium thread hits Arcane Will, Breath of Lightning, and Heart of Thunder, and I do want to use that, especially when I switch Forbidden Jewels, because these two nodes become crazy with that. It can also be Healthy Mind, which is really, really high value. Gives you more mana, more damage, but also gives you more ES because of Sanctuary of Thoughts conversion from mana into ES, which I think is your primary layer. When I'm mapping, I don't go below my energy shield. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of actually taking more than 2,000 damage, and frankly, I almost never do, especially with Instant Leech. But for now, this rare jewel is really strong because honestly, I have so low multi base. I'm at, well, actually I'm higher than this. I think I'm at like, yeah, 433 multi. Oh, I guess it goes up later. But yeah, so having this sort of 2-prop multi jewel is actually fairly significant. 7.4 for a single jewel is actually pretty solid. The all res is nice, the attack speed is nice. Just a budget option for now. So yeah, I think that's most of the build as covered. It's obviously got a few more levels in it now, and I think it's got really great potential. I do think that you will probably get more damage if you're playing pure Arcanist Brand Ice Nova right now, because self-casting with Ice Nova is just so incredibly powerful. But I think this build is actually very comparable in power, doesn't require that gem swap for Arcanist Brand, and I think at the later end, once I go into that Mage Blood setup, towards probably the end of this week as I farm more for it, it will be one of the strongest builds this patch at like that sort of smooth progression level. It won't quite compare with like the super high end things, I think, you know, the sort of Waldo farmers or even that sort of strength stack Molten Strike stuff, but it's a build that I'm really proud of stealing and putting my own twist on it and turning into, I think, probably the build I'll be playing the most for this league.